Good morning and praise the Lord, everyone. Happy to be in the house of the Lord this morning. I want us to pray before we get started this morning that God will touch our hearts and minds. I don't want to just come to the house of the Lord to be checking a list or checking a mark off like I did it. I showed up when I was supposed to do. But I want the Lord to touch my heart and change my life today. God, I worship you. I'm thankful for the opportunity, God, to come to your house to worship you in spirit and in truth. And I'm thankful for your love toward us today. Thank you for the ability to come to your house this morning. God, I'm thankful for your word. Thy word is a lamp unto my feet, a light unto my path. God, I ask that you touch our hearts and minds today. Help us to hear what you would have us hear, God, and help us to understand, God, and help us to do your will, Jesus. God, you are our help and our hope, and God, our exceeding joy. I thank you for it this morning. We've been talking about Solomon and David, and last week we learned that David wasn't able to build the house of God like he wanted to. He had a desire to, but when the Lord told him that he couldn't do it, he didn't get all pouty and puffed up and say, well, I'm not going to be a part of it. But he started and prepared what Solomon got to finish. Isn't that awesome? God has people for every area of the work. We were at one meeting one day. I don't remember. It seems like it was a ministry meeting. But it talked about some people are scaffolding. You know, they're there just for a short time, and they help do things, and then they're gone. Because when you're building, you put up scaffolding and to do different things, and then you remove it when it's finished. But I'm so thankful that God gives us the opportunity to be a part. And today we're going to talk about none other than Solomon again. This whole series is on David and Solomon. And our focus verse today, and we're going to say it more than once, I'm sure, but is 1 Kings 3 and 9. It says, give therefore thy servant an understanding heart to judge thy people, that I may discern between good and evil, good and bad. For who is able to judge this thy great, so great a people? And our lesson text comes from 1 King. You can read the 1 Kings 3. You can pretty much read the whole chapter. It's kind of where our lesson's coming from today. But God's wisdom contains every blessing we need. And we need to determine today, I will seek God's wisdom in every area of my life. There's a lot of people seeking wisdom today and knowledge. I may need to back up a little bit. I think maybe knowledge over wisdom. But there's a lot of people they're becoming more educated. Our generation seems like it's a little more educated. They want to go to school and they want to learn. And we have every kind of a learning tool at our fingertips today. If you don't know how to do something, just get on YouTube. Now, watch a few videos. You might feel like you can do it, but I'm telling you, every once in a while, those people that make it look so easy, it's not quite that easy. Been there and done that. I have put some things together. One time I was so proud of myself. I'm really not like real handy, but if I need to do a job, I'll figure it out. because I'm just mule-headed enough to say, I'm going to get this done. So I was so happy Brother Kane had bought these, and this is dating me because you don't see too many stereo stands today. But I was like, he had bought the boys these stereo things. I was like, I'm going to put these little tables together. And boy, I got my stuff out. I got that. I was so proud when I fastened that last bolt, and then I turned it up, and I had put the very top upside down. I was so aggravated. I was like, rawr. But it's true. You can get on YouTube and find out how to do so many things today. And let's face it, there is even not just how-to things, but there's tons of education out there that you can go and obtain for free. If you want to learn a musical instrument, get out there. There's tons of teaching out there on the web, free. And but we're going to learn, today we're going to talk about Solomon, and he wasn't just looking just for knowledge, he wanted wisdom. And this story actually was kind of neat. In the studying of this lesson, there was a story about somebody Googled who was the smartest or the most intelligent person, and, aside from God. But, they obviously got it wrong. But there was a guy named Christopher Michael Langan, and it told the story about how much opposition he went through, but how intelligent he was. But in the end, that intelligence and that knowledge and that wisdom wasn't used for the right things. And does that happen today? Yeah, it does. It does. So the Lord gave Solomon a dream. How many of y'all would love it if the Lord just gave you a dream today? And God works in dreams. I never want to, put down anything. And I can tell you, every dream is not of God. Thank God, because I have some goofy dreams sometimes. I'm like, how did that happen? But Gibeah was the first capital of the kingdom of Israel during the reign of King Saul. And it was located in what is now the northern part of Jerusalem and was considered a high place of worship. And Solomon traveled there to sacrifice to the Lord, taking over 1,000 animals to offer as burnt sacrifice, offering to the Lord. And while there, God spoke to Solomon in a dream that forever changed his life. And like I said, all of us dream and during the night, and that's called, you dream usually during your REM sleep. And that's one of those lovely acronyms that means rapid eye movement, sleep. Though some don't remember many of their dreams. I wake up every once in a while and think, oh, I had a dream, but I can't quite figure out what I dreamed. But the best studies indicate that dreams originate in the brain stem, but the prefrontal cortex, or that part of the brain associated with higher level reasoning, is not active when we sleep. So what would that tell you? Maybe our dreams are goofy sometimes. But that's why some dreams are strange. But for this reason, it's dangerous to ascribe that all dreams are spiritual or have spiritual significance. But sometimes it's just like biological, psychological response to various life events. Sometimes I get 2 or 3 things put together in a dream that happened somewhere in my life. Isn't that funny? But this was much different, I should say. And it's important having, when we're talking about dreams, it's important to have the right connection, our connection with God, and our walk with God. And so we find multiple examples in Scripture of God using dreams. And in fact, this is the method promised to us as members of the New Testament in Acts 2:16 and 17. It says, "But this is that which was spoken by the prophet Joel, and it came to pass in the last days, saith, it shall come to pass in the last days, saith God, I will pour out of my Spirit upon all flesh. And your sons and your daughters shall prophesy, and your young men shall see visions, and your old men shall dream dreams." And we used to laugh a little bit about this because when Brother Cain was very young, the Lord spoke to him in several powerful dreams. And he's talked about it, but when he was young, he was old. But you know what? Age is just nothing to God. He can use anybody at any time, anywhere. But God's offer, we're going to talk a little bit about God's offer to Solomon. So in his dream in Gibeah, God extended a remarkable and unqualified offer to Solomon. How many of y'all would like God to say, hey, whatever you want? How many of y'all like that? Come on. Woo! Oh, yes. So 1 Kings 3 and 5 says this, in Gibeah the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream by night. And God said, ask what I shall give thee. Boy, if you had the Lord say that, what if he only gave you one thing? We'd be going, we got a whole lot of stuff we want the Lord to, do. But just try to imagine the import, really, of those 6 words. Ask what I shall give thee. No limits or boundaries of any kind were presented. Whatever Solomon desired was his for the taking. As the one extending this offer was not you or I, but it was Jesus. See, because if it would have been us, we could have, backed out of it. But it was the Lord. Whatever Solomon desired was his. And realize that's unlimited. But subject to the will of God and our asking with the right motives, we are given, I want you to think about this morning, but subject to the will of God and our asking with the right motive, we're given essentially the same promise regarding not earthly work, kingdom work. In John 14:13 and 14, it says, and whatsoever ye ask in my name, that will I do, that the Father may be glorified in the Son. If ye ask anything in my name, I will do it. Isn't that powerful? A God able to do anything offers to do everything we legitimately need to advance the cause of Christ in the will of God. That's where the problem comes. This word from God for Solomon was the first time Solomon had heard directly from his Creator. It might have been difficult for him to believe such a thing was happening to him. It would have been easy for him to discount what was said as his own imagination and as like maybe a byproduct, I always say this, of something that he had eaten earlier. Because I always tease, I was like, oh man, you must have ate the wrong thing last night before you went to bed. But as children of God, we must be willing to hear his voice, whether it comes through the scriptures, through our spiritual authority, or by the voice of the Spirit. And you know what? God desires to communicate with us. Have you ever I was laughing and I was telling somebody the other night, I dated this. The reason me and Brother Kane first started dating is because I asked him out, and he'll tell that story. But I had this guy. He would ask me out every night of the week, and I was a crazy teenager. I was just loved to laugh and have a good time, and this guy was the quietest character you've ever seen. Very gentle, kind, but we would go out, and I would threaten. I lived with my brother and his wife, and I would tell my brother, I said, you tell him I have to be home in 1 hour and 30 minutes. And so my brother, he would just adhere to what I said, and he told him, he says, you've got to have her home in 1 hour and 30 minutes. So off we would go. And if we went out to eat, I would sit at that table, and the guy would hardly open his mouth. It was a one-sided conversation. I spoke, and I answered myself. And I thought, dear God, I cannot date this guy. It's a one-sided conversation all the time. It's driving me crazy. So that's just a funny story, but that's why I seen him headed. You have to realize we went to a very, very large church, and I seen this guy headed my direction after church one night, and I thought, I cannot do this again. I was like, so me and Brother Kane, we went on bus route together. He was a great friend. I was like, ding. I ran over there. I said, would you take me to charcoal oven? He says, well, sure. And so when this other guy came to ask me, which I knew he was, I says, listen, I've already told Kevin that I was going with him. I didn't tell him. I asked him to go. I asked him to take me. But anyway, he lives here in Houston today. That guy, he was a very kind person. But again, I'm saying that to say this. Who wants to participate in a one-sided conversation? And God doesn't either. It's a two-way street. So anyway, God is so awesome this morning. We must be willing to hear his voice. And so God desires to communicate with us, but we've got to be that other willing part. And more than a few times, the scriptures use the phrase, if any man have ears to hear. And I'll go through these real quick. Matthew 11:15 says, he that hath ears to hear, let him hear. Mark 7:16 says, if any man have ears to hear, let him hear. Luke 14:35 says, it is neither fit for the land nor yet for the dunghill, but men cast it out. He that hath ears to hear, let him hear. You think it's so awesome how God made us with one mouth and two ears. We ought to listen, and it's been said many, many times, listen twice as much as we talk. And I can promise you, you'll get in less trouble. Because when the mouth is moving, wheels are moving everywhere. I know from experience. But when God speaks, it is necessary for us to respond. It doesn't matter what God speaks today if we don't respond on it. we call that going in one ear and out the other. Takes no root. It's gone. But here Solomon demonstrated this. As staggering as the offer from God was, Solomon did not hesitate to make his request known. He responded in faith that if God had extended such an awesome promise, he desired this newly crowned king to express his heart's desire. But what Solomon's heart desired is what is so noteworthy today. And Solomon could have asked for anything that would have made his life better or more comfortable. Because when we think about things today, that's what we want. We want to have things and we want to be more comfortable. It's just us. But he could have requested boundless wealth. He could have said, I want the best military. I want to live a long life. But any of those would have improved the quality of Solomon's life. But instead, I really want you to think about this today, because he was not. What is our world? Somebody help me this morning. What is our world full of? It's all about you. No, it's all about me. Selfish. Matter of fact, most marriages dissolve. If they dissolve, it's because of selfishness. But instead of asking something selfish to improve his own life, he recognized that his youth and his inexperience made him ill-equipped to lead a nation like Israel. Now, was Solomon, it wasn't his first rodeo. Because remember, he was a king's son. So just living in that home taught him many things. But he also realized when he took the kingdom, he felt ill-equipped. Maybe he might need a little bit extra to lead a great people. And this humility compelled him to make the following request in 1 Kings 3:9. Give therefore thy servant an understanding heart to judge thy people, that I may discern between good and bad, for who is able to judge this thy so great a people? It was all about God's kingdom. How did Solomon have the wisdom to ask for wisdom before he had wisdom? That's a crazy thought. What guided Solomon's choice at this pivotal moment in history and in Israel's? Perhaps the answer can be found in something he wrote later in Proverbs 4:3 and 4 and 7. For I was my father's son, tender and only beloved in the sight of my mother. He taught me also and said unto me, let thy heart retain my words, keep my commandments and live. Wisdom is the principal thing, therefore get wisdom. And with all thy getting, get understanding. It's not all just about wisdom. You got to have some understanding. There's some powerful words. And never, with that, just think about it. Never underestimate how godly instruction you give to your children will benefit them at a critical, pivotal place in their life. I've done things, and then I hear that little voice of my mom. And I was, oh, yeah, I remember. Those pivotal things, those things that God placed in there. And I'll hurry along. Because Solomon's request was so selfless, God was most pleased. He promised Solomon that because he had not asked for wealth or military might or long life, God would add those blessings over and above the wise heart granted in response to Solomon's specific request. Have you ever had a request of God? Maybe we should think maybe about others, and then the Lord will add what we need. He's gracious like that. In 1 Kings, you can just read 1 Kings 10, 1 through 9 there. Time would, in those scriptures, this would demonstrate that God kept his word. As Solomon's wealth and his kingdom took the breath away from everybody wanted to see, even other world leaders. Because, on top of that wisdom, God gave him fame and fortune and wealth and all kinds of stuff. But while the promise of a wise heart was fulfilled unconditionally, at least one of the additional blessings included a caveat. How many of y'all like that? I'm going to do this, but you got to do this. Yeah? Most of us don't like it. But 1 Kings 3 and 14 says, "And if thou wilt walk in my ways to keep my statutes and my commandments, as thy father David did, then I will lengthen thy days." But God tied the length of Solomon's days to the willingness to keep his commandments. It's pretty awesome today. If you think about it, we've got a lot of promise. And there's some caveats along the way. I'll let that sink in for just a second, because sometimes you say, "Oh, God, I'll go anywhere, I'll do anything, on and on," as long as we give the Lord little caveats. We must always be aware of the conditions tied to many of God's promises. Do you think we can live any old way and get to heaven? No. There's some caveats there. That's a promise. He's given us the promise of the Holy Ghost. But I could give you a promise of a gift today, and if you never come and picked it up, you wouldn't have it. There's a lot of action on our part we need to do. I wish there were things that we could just receive via osmosis, but we can't. Solomon's example should guide us in our responses to God's promises. Our prayers must ever be humble, kingdom prayers, so that we may secure from God what is needed for our effective service in this life, in God's service. Remember, what you do for God will last. It's eternal. What you do in this world, I'm telling you, I work a crazy job, and I work hard. But at the end of the day, if I left that job, they'd never know I left that job. I don't want to be ugly about it this morning, but you're just another number. And when you leave, I don't care if you've worked yourself to death, they go, "Next." Put that posting on the board and get the next person in here. And I don't say that, I'm not saying there are some companies that appreciate you. But I'm just saying, as a general rule, it's not. But what you do for God is eternal. Make sure that you're not negating the things for God to accomplish something that is earthly that will pass away. And it's evident that leading a nation as great and as vast as Israel would not be an easy task. And Solomon knew this. And that fact compelled his request for wisdom to the Lord. And as Solomon settled into his new assignment, and I want you to think about this morning, God's answers to that request were quickly displayed. Where? None other than the courtroom. The situation was presented seemed an impossible one. Two immoral ladies lived in the same house and each had a child born 3 days apart. And the ladies appeared before Solomon with a horrific account. In the night, one of the ladies had rolled over onto her child and suffocated him. And upon discovering it, she didn't mourn, but she says, I'm going to run in there and I'm going to take that lady's baby and I'm going to put this dead baby by her and I'm going to take that other one for my own because I'm going to have a living son. I'm going to have a living baby. So upon discovering this terrible loss, this grief-stricken lady took her deceased child and placed him next to the other lady while taking the lady's baby. And in the morning, you know what did the lady of the deceased, what do you think they would have done? They started arguing about who the living baby belonged to. But God's supernatural investment of wisdom into Solomon prompted him. And he said, bring me a sword. How would you like to be in a court and say, you have this baby up here, and the one that's overseeing, the judge, just says, bring me a sword, we'll get this resolved right away. I probably would have ran right out of the door. 1 Kings 3:24 and 25, it says, and the king said, bring me a sword, and they brought a sword before the king. And the king said, divide the living child in two and give half to the one and half to the other. And I won't even go there this morning, but you can just imagine the temperature in the room. And the true mother of the child quickly pled that the child would be spared and given to the other lady, because even though that lady knew that that was her baby, she didn't want to have a baby, and she didn't want that baby dead. And she was like, oh, just give it to them. And you know what the other lady, do you think the other lady said, oh, thank you? She was the lying mom, had no such reaction. She would have just had it killed. Go ahead, my baby died, this is going to be dead. But Solomon's judgment in that situation demonstrated divine empowerment and word of his wise discernment quickly spread among his subjects. In 1 Kings 3:28, and all Israel heard of the judgment which the king had judged, and they feared the king, for they saw that the wisdom of God was in him. Not the wisdom of the world, but the wisdom of God was in him to do judgment. And his profound wisdom, it made Solomon's kingdom solid, standing as Israel's sovereign nation. But none could doubt that this man was God's selected leader for the people. And we need today, and I'm over time here, but wisdom is a commodity that you can't measure it. Proverbs 8:11 says, for wisdom is better than rubies, and all the things that may be desired are not to be compared to it. And given that wisdom is, I guess, primarily a spiritual commodity, experience alone, nor a book other than the Bible can provide it. You can't just read. Like I said at the beginning, we have a world full of knowledge, but knowledge doesn't equal wisdom. James 1:5 says, if any of you lack wisdom, let him ask of God, that giveth to all men liberally, and upbraideth not, and it shall be given him. Solomon's days witness his submission to godly wisdom and his rejection. But we can observe the benefits of wise choices and the vanity and despair of unwise ones in his life. And we just need to ask God for wisdom today. We've been in many, many situations in my short life that had God not given us wisdom, we would have been in a bad fix. God imparts wisdom if we will ask. And he wants you not just to have wisdom, but he wants you to have understanding. You're dismissed in Jesus' name.